I feel like my plans are perfect. Why are they not working out? Why do I feel so out of control? Why do I feel like I'm the only one who can't hold it all together? Is life controlled by destiny or fate?
Well, hi everyone. The question of the week is, who is in control? Like, who controls your destiny? From nursery school onward, we're taught that it's you. We're told things like the early bird gets the worm, or you get what you pay for, or hard work always pays off. These are the ways to succeed in this world. So you're in control of your own destiny if you do these things. Well, when I was in my 20s, I was on a whitewater rafting trip with a group of students. I was the youth pastor at the time, and I was supposed to be the responsible one. We were going down the New River on a raft and coming up on a level 4 rapid. Our guide had told us that if we get tossed out of the boat, simply flip over onto your back, point your feet down the river, and use your feet to kind of navigate off the rocks or the boulders that you're going to hit along the way. And he said, we'll pick you up at the next calm section. I was certain I wouldn't be the one thrown off. I was the pastor. I was yelling at the kids, make sure you listen to the guide. You little kids could get thrown out of this boat like a little pebble. So we get all settled in. I'm up front. I have my foot tucked under the tube, just like he told us. We're heading for one of the more complicated rapids that we're going to face all day. And we hit the first drop, and I got catapulted out of the front of the boat, like a spectacular forward flip. But that wasn't the scary part. The scary part was when I finally started to surface after being underwater for what seemed like a really long time, and I came up and my head hit the bottom of the boat. And so I pushed off to try to let the raft pass by and to come up behind it, and I came up and my head hit the boat again. And I had the famous life flash before your eyes moment. I remember the rushing sound of the water all around me. It sounded like I was standing next to a jet engine. It was so loud. I was completely powerless. My life was completely out of my control. There were forces bigger than me that needed to kick in for me to take one more breath. Now, I finally came up, finally took a breath. I tried getting in that sitting position, which is totally overrated in the middle of a level 4 rapid, by the way. Like, your body is not calm. I don't know where my feet were pointing. It was total chaos, panic mode. But finally, I hopped in the boat at the next calm section of the river with a totally different perspective. As a young 20-something, I realized I control nothing. Like, if I couldn't even take a next breath in that moment, there are forces bigger than me at play. Now, that was a dramatic example, but that question finds its way into the mundane moments of our life as well. Who's in control of my life? There are other examples, like maybe you're single and you held off on getting married while you were young so that you could pursue your career. And now you're ready and you can't find a partner. Or you finally decide to have kids only to find out you can't have kids. Or you realize that your quarter life crisis or your midlife crisis or your 3/4 life crisis, that you've lived with a kind of disappointment in not becoming who you wanted to become. Or maybe you found your way into an addiction that you can't break out of. All of these things leave us questioning, am I in control of my destiny, or are there other forces at play? Well, we're in week 4 of our series called Making Faith Magnetic. It's based on a book by Dr. Daniel Strange by the same title. And the point is that every person has these God-given longings. We looked at Romans 1 that says, many people suppress the truth that God is the answer for those longings. And they try to satisfy their longings with things other than God, seeking ultimate fulfillment in created things rather than the Creator himself. And the longing that we're going to look at today is the longing to know who's in control. And so here's today's big idea. Everyone's asking, am I the master of my own destiny? People are wondering, am I in control of my life? Am I captive to circumstances, or do my circumstances control me? Do I have freedom to make my own decisions, or is something like fate or karma or luck or some other impersonal force at work? And although we know ourselves to be active players in this world, at the same time, we have this nagging feeling that we're also passive participants in someone else's world. And so you'll sometimes hear people who don't even practice faith say things like, well, I guess that was just meant to be. You ever heard that? Or I had to go through that difficult circumstance because there's a reason for everything. Is there? Like, why do we have this sneaking sense that there's some benevolent or maybe malevolent force that's writing a bigger story that we're just a part of? Some people think of it as luck, or curses. Maybe you've heard of this quiet conspiracy phenomenon, but in almost every field, from phone call centers to police stations to emergency rooms, there's this unwritten rule that you never say, it's a quiet night, or it's been a quiet shift, or it sure has been quiet today. Why? Well, it's bad luck. It's the curse of all curses, which just invites trouble. In fact, there have been full-blown studies to see if this is even real. Like that somehow the outgoing shift of firefighters telling the incoming shift that it's been a quiet night causes more fires to happen on that next shift. We have such a deep sense that there's something bigger at play, that we're actors in a story, that there are these bigger forces like fate or luck or curses. Well, this unfulfilled longing for control causes us to scramble because we do want to be in control. We want to be in control of our own destiny. And so what we've done is we've tried to take over as God. We try to arrange our lives just so, or we try to make our kids behave just so. And at work, if I do this behavior, then I'll get this outcome. And if I can achieve the aesthetic of that YouTuber, or get my meals to look like this TikToker, or get my body to look like that influencer, then I'll be in full control of my destiny. But it gets confusing because we want to be like God, but deep down we know we're not God. Because you can invest in your marriage and it still struggles. You can do your best with your kids and they still seem to hate you. You pour yourself into your job and you're not really happy. And there's this sense of maybe I don't control as much as I think I do. Well, I want to suggest to you today that we are part of something bigger, but that bigger thing is not an evil force. It's also not an impersonal force like fate. It is a sovereign force. It is a God who loves and cares for you. And so I want us to look at one of the most common metaphors in the Bible about this relationship that exists between God and people. It's the metaphor of a shepherd and sheep. And I need to tell you, the metaphor demonstrates the role that we both have in this story. And so I want to take you over to John chapter 10, starting in verse 10. You can turn there in your Bible or device. And it's a famous passage from Jesus about the good shepherd. And I think what we're going to see Jesus shows us who is in control. So look at John chapter 10, verse 10. It says, I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. He who is a hired hand and not a shepherd, who does not own the sheep, sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and flees, but then the wolf snatches them and scatters them. He flees because he's a hired hand and he cares nothing for the sheep. But I am the good shepherd, and I know my own, and my own know me, just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. So just like these other longings that we've talked about, a Christian view of control and destiny is relational. It's deeply personal because God is the one who made you and designed you. He's the one who knows you best and who knows what is best for you. And not only does he have this knowledge of what's best, but he will lead you there and guide you there himself if you will follow him. He is, after all, the good shepherd. And Jesus shows us that he is the one who's in control. So this metaphor of the shepherd goes all the way back to the Old Testament. In fact, the 23rd Psalm is one of the most famous passages in all of the Bible. You've probably heard it at a variety of funerals. But it presents God in this way, and it touches a very deep nerve inside us. Because he's the one who can take me to calm places, and he's the one who restores my weary and aching heart, and he's the one who provides for me complete safety, and he's the one who provides deep satisfaction and peace. And it touches this deep nerve in us. It awakens a very deep yearning to have someone in control of our destinies who cares so deeply about us. So deep that some of you are being driven by it and trying to find it in other people. You're trying to find a great shepherd somewhere else, in some human being or some human institution. And frankly, it's not fair to that friend or spouse or church or group because they don't have the capacity to carry your destiny. Only Jesus qualifies. And he shows us what this relationship looks like and who's actually in control. And I want you to see this from this passage. What does it mean to give God control of your life? Well, the first, you have to understand God's goodness. Like this whole idea of giving up control sounds terrifying, and it would be terrifying if not for the goodness of the good shepherd. Like if control was being seized from you or ripped from your hands or coerced away from you, well, that's one thing, but we willingly give God control because he's good. You saw it again and again in this passage. Jesus says he's good and he's leading, and that's good, and he's caring, and that's good, and he promises an abundant life, and that is good. And so by claiming his role as the good shepherd, Jesus is revealing that your life is not being governed by fate or karma. But when you give God control of your life, you're being led by the capable hand of a good and loving shepherd. And so like a sheep and the shepherd, the Bible affirms that yes, there is a sense in which we're both in control and under control at the same time, because there's both human responsibility and there's divine sovereignty. And that doesn't mean that God is some divine computer programmer and that we're the robots. No, the Christian view of destiny is actually liberating, because we believe that our good God has an unfolding plan for our lives, and that through all the ups and downs and all the twists and turns, we will get to the destination that he's promised. We can trust his plan because we can trust him, and we can trust him because he's good. You know, there's this age-old debate about God's sovereignty versus our free will. How do these two concepts work together? And I'm convinced that some things like this will be a mystery until we get to heaven. But A.W. Tozer gave an interesting analogy. He said, imagine an ocean liner leaves New York and it's bound for Liverpool. Its destination has been determined by proper authorities. Nothing can change it. This is at least a faint picture of sovereignty. And on board that ocean liner are several scores of passengers, and they're not in chains. Their activities are not determined for them by decree. They're completely free to move about as they will. They eat and they sleep and they play. They lounge on the deck. They read. They talk together as they please. But all the while, the great ocean liner is carrying them steadily onward toward a predetermined port. Both freedom and sovereignty are present here, and they don't contradict each other. This at least gets us in the ballpark. It's not perfect, but it gets us close. But you have to determine to give yourself fully to the good shepherd and to his plan. And then you have incredible freedom in that system. So when Jesus says, I'm the good shepherd, he's saying that he has to be everything to you. You have to give yourself totally to him, because when the Bible talks about us being sheep as often as it does, please realize that's not super flattering. Like, there are all kinds of wild animals that he could have chosen from. There are wild horses, there are wild cats, there's wild dogs. There are no wild sheep. Why? Because sheep are too helpless to be wild. For example, if you give a normal animal its freedom, like you set a horse free, what does it do? It goes, freedom, and it runs off into the wild as free as the wind blows. But you set a sheep loose, what does a sheep do? It wanders around saying, where the heck am I, and who's bringing me supper? The sheep are helpless. And so a shepherd, a good shepherd, actually lives with the sheep, sleeps with the sheep. The shepherd does everything for the sheep. The shepherd is the sheep's protector and provider and physician and leader and guide and owner. The shepherd is everything to the sheep. It's a picture to remind us that, yes, we are free. Yes, we get to make decisions, but we are hopeless without placing ourselves under the goodness of God's grace. And so to give God control of your life, you must first understand his goodness. He's worth it. But second, we submit to God's guidance. Back up to the beginning of chapter 10, Jesus describes the guidance of the Good Shepherd this way. He says, the sheep hear his voice, and he calls his own sheep by name, and he leads them out. And when he has brought out all his own, he goes before them, and the sheep follow him, for they know his voice. And so the good shepherd isn't driving sheep from behind like a taskmaster. He's leading them from the front, inviting them to follow him. And why would they choose to follow him? Well, he knows them intimately. We said earlier, he's a good shepherd. It's his goodness. And notice here, he knows his sheep by name, and they know his voice. A shepherd back in the day knew his sheep so intimately that he would give each one of them a name, even if there were hundreds of sheep. He would recognize them by their markings, by their distinguishing features, so that he knew them personally. And so when Christ sees you, guys, he sees you personally. He sees you intimately. He looks at you and he sees someone who belongs to him. You are his. And I ask you today, how would it change things for you if you knew you were called by name by the God of the Bible? He knows what you're going through. He knows why you're going through it. He knows how you feel about it. He knows you better than you know yourself. He could write the complete, unfiltered biography of you. He knows the number of hairs on your head. Psalm 56 says that God even keeps track of all of your sorrows. says, you have collected all my tears in your bottle. God is saving up every one of the tears that you cry into your pillow at night so that he can one day make it right. The idea that God is some far-off deity who just doesn't get me is a complete misunderstanding of the God of the Bible. So when it comes to something like who's in control of my destiny, Jesus' control over our lives is not impersonal and it's not tyrannical. Our obedience to him is not like just throwing up our hands and submitting to fate. Well, I get what's going to happen is going to happen. It is what it is. No, instead, we obey in the context of a relationship of love. We know that the Good Shepherd loves and protects and always has our best in mind, and he's guiding us. And when it comes to submitting to his guidance, we have to submit comprehensively. Like you and I don't get to pick and choose. When he's the shepherd, it means that he has to be everything to you. It means, as he says in John 15, without me, you can do nothing. Like everything about our heart fights against that phrase. But in moments like my whitewater rafting moment, it becomes very abundantly clear. Without him, I can't even breathe my next breath. I'm dependent on someone for my very next breath. And so I owe him everything. You see, we might like the sound of the phrase, the Lord is my shepherd, because it sounds all soft and cuddly, but we actually hate the truth of it because our heart basically believes, I'm a pretty good person. I'm more intelligent than most people. You can generally make the right decisions, except when things get really tough. But you don't need a shepherd. You're just fine charting your own destiny. I'm here to tell you today, true freedom begins when you face the facts that you need a shepherd to guide you. And it's not quite enough to just admit that you need a shepherd. You admit that you need to submit to God's guidance. You also have to actually practice it. Your doctor may convince you that your cholesterol's high and you may not eat salt. Yeah, and you can admit that. You can face that fact. You could look them right in the eye and say, all right, doc, that is absolutely true. I admit it. But it's another thing to moment by moment practice that truth, isn't it? It's another thing to live as if it's true. You can admit that it's true, but do you live as if it's true? And the same is true here. You can admit that you need God to guide you, but what does it mean to live moment by moment as if God is a shepherd rather than a consultant? You have to obey him. I know many of you think you obey him to some degree or another, like you're kind of moral, you have some standards, but to practice his presence as a shepherd in your life, you have to obey him comprehensively. For example, a sheep can't say to the shepherd, okay, you can help me over here in this area, but not over here. Like this part is mine. I can do this part on my own. But we do that to God all the time. We say, sure, God, this is an area I'd be very happy to listen to you about, but hands off this other area. And if you're saying that, you're denying the shepherdhood of God. You're not treating him as a shepherd. The organization, the Navigators, used to have an exercise that they would encourage. They would say, write down a list of every area of your life. So just make categories. Write down the list of all areas of your life. The political aspect of you, the social aspect, the sexual, the professional, the financial, the family, the recreational, your thought life, like every single area of your life. And then they would say, now just ask yourself 2 questions as you look at that list. Am I willing to obey everything I know God wants me to obey in that area? Secondly, am I willing to thank God for whatever he's bringing to me in that area? And if you can't say yes to both of those questions, you're really denying the shepherding grace and guidance of God. And listen, that there's no area that we can exclude. Here's why. He's a shepherd. Like if he was only a king, like that's a big deal. But if he was only a king, or if he was only a father, or if he was only a judge, or if he was only a friend, or if he was only a rock, or if he's only a refuge, or only a warrior, like as great as all those images are, those kinds of people only have access to one part of your life. But a shepherd's a different deal, because a shepherd has access to everything. No area can be excluded, not one. And so are you the master of your own destiny? Is your destiny in your own hands? The answer is actually no. You need the good shepherd to lead you, to guide you according to his sovereign leading. And some of you are like, I don't want that. That's fine. But here's the deal. while not following the shepherd feels like temporary freedom, it actually, in the end, always leads to destruction. He's the only one who knows the way you should go because he's the only one who made you and he's the only one who can sustain you. But here's the kicker. This thing gets even more intimate than that because not only is the shepherd good and not only does he offer guidance, but he's done the unthinkable. The ultimate demonstration of love and trustworthiness to hold our destinies in his hand. At the end of verse 15, Jesus says, "The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep." In the original language, this phrase actually reads, "The good shepherd lays down his life instead of or in place of the sheep." Can you imagine how crazy this sounded to the original crowd? Like, we have the benefit of looking back through history to see how this played out, but to them, Jesus was dropping hints that he was going to be dying a death that the sheep would have died. And when is the last time that you just personalized that? Just remember that there was a sacrificial death in your place for your sins so that you could live forever. When's the last time you just worshiped him for that? Our good shepherd looks at us and he says, "I love my sheep so much that I will give my life for theirs." And think about Jesus before the cross, how agonizing that was in the garden, collapsing and saying things like my soul is grieved to the point of death, looking up to his Father and saying, I know I need to do this, but I don't think I can go through with it. Father, can you get me out of this? Do we really have to do it this way? If it were up to me, I would figure out another way, but not my will, but yours be done. And God the Father looks back at Jesus and he says, "I see you, son, and I love you with an eternal love. But if you could see the guilt of all my other children that will be covered over by your sacrifice. Like if right now you could just see all of the sheep who will be saved because of your obedience to the cross, then you would understand." And Jesus says, "I understand." That's why Jesus, at the end of our passage today, he says in verses 17 and 18, I lay down my life that I may take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord, and I have authority to lay it down, and I have authority to take it up again. And then he died, and then he rose again. And what he's saying he's the only one with that authority over time and space, over life and death. He's the only one. Not you, not me, not the most powerful person you can think of on this earth. Only Jesus has that authority, which means he's in control, and he's in control of your destiny. And your best chance is to surrender all you know of yourself to all you know of him. And listen, the people in your life who are longing to know who controls my destiny, the greatest act of love that you can do for them is to point them to Jesus. And so I'm going to turn you now over to your host as we consider who in our lives may have this longing and how can we best have that conversation with them. I love you guys.